Well, hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you have joined us tonight. My name is Amy, and I'm from the Mission app. This is a new venture where we're doing our best to help those who are called into missions find the right sending agency for them. And I've had the honor of meeting many mobilizers as I'm getting to know the different agencies, and my co-host, Tim Reber, is one of those. This is our very first webinar, so we are learning along with you, but we thought that it would be important to maybe give you some options for those of you who are called to teach, and yet you want to head into missions as well. How can those work together? So Tim is the right person to tell us about this. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He is married to Jill, has been for 29 years. They've got 4 kids. They've got 1 grandson. Tim loves the outdoor types of things. But the reason he's great to do this session today is that he's been in education for more than 31 years. And he's also been in missions for 13 years. So he is going to share with us some of the things that we can learn if you have both of those giftings. And before I hand things over to him, I just want to tell you a few logistical things. You aren't able to respond in this vocally or audibly, but there's that chat bar on the right-hand side. If you have comments or questions, feel free to type those in. We're going to have a question and answer time at the end, and we'll facilitate that, and Tim can answer any questions that you guys might have. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. Well, Amy, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And
sure.
It's a privilege for me to be here tonight. So I'm praying that this will be something that will be impactful for you, and that it will be interesting, at least as you consider teaching and missions. So just a little bit more about myself. As Amy said, married, 4 kids. I've been an educator for over 30 years. The first 18 years of my career was in a Christian school in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And there I taught middle school and high school, lots of different subjects, but also became an administrator and was an administrator there for 10 years. And then God stirred our heart to missions. And actually, it wasn't just a one-time thing, but God stirred our heart, has been actually doing that over a number of years through a number of different means. But he began to just stir us to say, there's something more that I have for you beyond just what's in the States. And so we started a journey that took us to AIM and Rift Valley Academy, which is in Kenya. And we were there for 9 years, and we did a number of different roles there, like most educators do. I was a Bible teacher, and then we were also dorm parents, and we helped out in some administrative roles. And with my administration background, I eventually became the high school principal as well at RVA for 5 years. So I have a little bit of experience, and I'm very passionate about education. I'm very passionate about missions, and also I just want to do anything that I can to help cast that vision of how people can find their place in the Great Commission. So as we talk about teachers and teaching and world missions, there are several ways that I think that the teaching profession can be impactful in the Great Commission. And of course, we have within AIM, we really define it in 2 different ways. One, we call it more of a support type of ministry, where we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's an opportunity for us to support those that are on the field. And then secondly, we also have opportunities for direct ministry or direct participation in the Great Commission and proclamation. So number one, I just want to talk about formal education opportunities. Like I've shared with you before, my experience has been with a boarding school at Rift Valley Academy, and there are others that are all throughout the world, Black Forest Academy in Kandern, Germany, and then there are plenty of others. Most of the time, these are regular formal junior highs, high school, elementary schools, where most of the time they may be focused on an American curriculum, and a lot of times they're boarding programs, and that actually helps answer a lot of key questions for missionaries on the field about how can they educate their children. And what I found out over the years is that sometimes boarding school, and I know there are various opinions about boarding school and various experiences about that. But in some cases, it actually answers a lot of problems, or it's a solution for some difficulties that families have. However you feel about that, that is an option, and it's not the only option, but it is certainly, for me, was a great option for my career, but also for my family. So I would highly encourage you to consider schools like that. But then beyond boarding schools, we have regular Christian day schools. And you see on the slide there, Faith Academy in the Philippines, Roslyn Academy, which is also in Kenya, just outside of Nairobi. And that was kind of a sister school for us at RVA, rival in sports, but workers in every other capacity. And we actually did a lot together where we tried to do some professional development and really encourage one another. But those are Christian school, they're day school opportunities. Most of the time, this is a fit for families that live locally. They don't necessarily need or even want a boarding type of environment, but certainly answers the question of education for their children. And then on a more basic level, I know lots of mission agencies, including AIM, have homeschooling opportunities where a teacher can come and be a part of a team on location, or actually even be a part of a family, and where their sole role would be the education of the children of that family, or even the children of a team. My most recent experience in the field, I went to Tanzania to visit a team that was working together, and there was a homeschool teacher there whose sole responsibility was educating all of the kids on the team, and it enabled families at the time for their ministry, both husband and wife, to focus on ministry and not have to focus a lot of energy into the education of their kids. And so it was very helpful in terms of expanding and enlarging a ministry that was available.
Sure.
A lot of times these are training teams. For AIM, I can't speak for other organizations, but a lot of the teams that we have that we recruit homeschooling teachers for are our training teams. And this allows both husband and wife, again, the time and space, not just for ministry, eventually it will be, but also for language learning, cultural learning, and engagement in the community, just to become a belonger. And if we're looking to have longevity on the field, it is very important that these families become belongers in their communities. And often it can be this type of focus, a homeschooling teacher that is available and willing to stay for a year or two, or even longer, that enables that time and space for them to become a belonger. So we view that as a very important part of our ministry. So we actively recruit for homeschool teachers for both families and for our teams. And then those were all what I would call more related to support ministry. But then we also have opportunities for direct ministry, and some of them overlap. So as you look at the opportunities that you might have in some of those day schools, and here's another opportunity where there might be a recruitment to international schools. Often there are lost components of those communities. And in these schools and in these communities, this is a great way for one to have an identity that makes sense to people, but also to begin to have impact and just to gain influence into the community. And so this is another way that you can be involved using your educational skills. And a lot of times this might be a very professional foundation or identity that would allow you to get into some creative access locations. And so we look at this within our organization. I know other organizations do the same thing. That professional placement can be a very strategic way of reaching the unreached and the lost. So we
Mm,
look at that, again, look at that as a very vital part of the ministry.
mm,
Then beyond just teaching in a formal school or teaching in a formal curriculum type thing, there's also opportunities for you to use your teaching skills in very specific and unique ways. So another one would be teaching English classes. For a lot of our creative access, this is our big identity or a platform that can be used to get into communities. There is a felt need. Oftentimes, governments will recognize the value of of English for business and for
mm,
lots of reasons.
mhm,
And so they're always looking for professionals that would be able to come and teach English. We have actually, within our organization, we do it as a means to gain access to a community. But we've also been asked by governments to come into businesses or to come into actually government locations and help teach English. And so it's actually given us very unique opportunities and some unique networking things that have helped us in the long run. So
mm,
um, teaching English as a second language, and a lot of you may be familiar with CELTA or TESOL or other things that could be training opportunities for you um, to get your certificate. But this is a key way that you could use your education in a direct ministry way. And the way a lot of times it works is simply, you get to meet people at these classes, and because it's a repeated opportunity, you get to meet the same people again and again and again, which means you build friendships. And then most of the time, they're not allowed to share the gospel or to share any kind of proclamation on or in the classes. But what a lot of our teachers will do is to say, "Hey, let's get a cup of coffee after class, and so go hang out for a while." So not only can you get a chance to use your educational skills, but if you love coffee, that would be another way that you could use that skill. Um, and then there's not a slide for this one, but I'm going to throw one more out,
sure.
and that is theological education.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
as far as the goals for Africa Inland Mission, part of our goal in our ministry, we want to plant Christ-centered churches among all African peoples. But we also want to strengthen the local church. And part of that strengthening is the theological education. So we're raising up and training pastors, church leaders to be able to disciple, to be able to grow people. And eventually the goal is to see a strong church become a sending church. So Africans reaching out to Africans.
love
Um,
it.
and
Yes.
so that's a key part of our ministry, and so we focus on that. We have lots of theological educational opportunities. So I know that is more of a specific educational training and background that's needed for that. But if that is a bent that you're interested in, there's lots of opportunities for that as well. And then it's not just in a formal type of seminary setting. That is one opportunity, but there's also opportunities in some more informal things. So be able to visit pastors in the local village and to sit
Mm,
under a tree and just open the word and be able to share as a way that is often used. So those are the opportunities that that I wanted to present to you tonight, and I feel like there's lots of different ways that if you are interested, feel stirred by God to use your teaching skills. There are plenty of opportunities available to you all across the world where you can find your place in the Great Commission. So there
yeah,
you have it. Okay,
that, yeah, that's great to hear. Can you tell me just a little more about what you mean by a belonger?
sure. Um, when you start thinking about an area of ministry,
Yes.
what you're thinking about is, how can I um, how can I invest into a community? So if you think about it in terms of as a teacher, you think about it in terms of the developmental cycle of people. So as you go to a new community, you may go as a physical adult, but you're entering that culture and that language as a baby. And
True.
so
Yeah.
there has to be a growth and development that happens.
Okay.
And so what you do is the first thing you do is you start learning language. You learn your
Hmm.
letters, numbers, the days, and how do you find a bathroom, all those kind of things. And then eventually you begin like a toddler. You start to figure out how to put sentences together and all of that. But eventually you start to you grasp the language, but then you also begin to grasp some of the culture. How do things work in that local community? And what we have found as an organization is that the faster and the deeper that you can become a belonger, so where you are recognized by that community as a valuable component to it,
Yeah.
where they see you taking the time and energy to learn a language, to be like them, to respect them, um, and then inviting them into your circle of friendship and daily living. And once that happens, and if that happens on a deep level, we have found that people stay longer and have more impactful ministry. So that's why I think it's very important that those first couple of years for people are essential in helping to become a belonger in the community.
I love that word, belonger. I haven't heard someone use that. One of my friends talked about it as being find your fun friends, so that when you have downtime and you just do something fun, make sure you're connecting with people in the community as part of your fun friends. But the term belonger, brings all that together. I like that. That's very good.
Yeah. and,
Yeah.
and that's what people yearn for. We
Yeah.
want to belong to something.
Yes.
That's human nature. So when we go to these, schools, we want to be, we want to belong in the school community. But when you go live in a community, you want to be a belonger there. And so it's very important that people find that.
Okay, sounds good. Now, for those of you who are listening, feel free to type in some questions. And then in the meantime, I'm going to ask a few that you've already sent to me via email as we've been talking about this. I know some of you who have been in contact with me are joining us for this call as well. So I know one of the questions that comes up is, do you need people who have skills in special education? Or yeah, that's probably the best way to phrase that. I know I myself have a son with Down syndrome, my youngest, and he has had access to amazing support all the way up through. He loved his school years. How about if you've got training and that kind of thing? Is there an opening for you in missions?
Absolutely.
Mm,
The nature of the community of kids, needing education is no different in missions than it is in any other place of the world. So, believe me, God stirs family who have kids with special
yep.
needs, and
Yep.
and kids with special needs is not that's not a deal breaker, in God's economy. So when we look at the opportunities for families, in fact, I actually can think of one right now
Mm,
um, that I'm working with that wants to go to RBA
yes.
and has a special needs child. So RBA, I know, again, I'm speaking in terms of AIM, but I can speak, I believe, for any of the schools. The heart is there to be able to meet as many educational needs, a vast need as possible. And if I'm speaking now as a former administrator, if I knew I had someone on staff that had the ability and skills for special needs, that changes
Mm.
the way that I look at applications and the way that we can invite people to be a part of the school. So absolutely, there's a place for them.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I also had someone who applied with us who has American Sign Language as a skill that they've trained in. Now, I know that's specific, of course, to American Sign Language. So the person who's deaf who might need access in some way, um, it wouldn't be as helpful, of course, to send them perhaps to a country that's speaking a different language. Um, but I'm guessing from what you're saying then that you would feel free to welcome a student who's deaf, let's say at one of these day schools or Christian schools, or any of these teaching opportunities, if you knew, like you would, it'd be easier to welcome someone who is deaf if you knew you had someone who could do the interpreting, or maybe that would even be on a homeschool basis where someone could help teach, if they had American Sign Language.
Sure.
Yeah.
I definitely think that, certainly on a homeschool level, a specific need of a family or, on a team, there certainly would be a place for that.
Okay.
Some schools may have that, although that can be, just having one interpreter may not always meet the need of someone that is attending a formal school. But let me challenge that thinking a little bit
Yes,
and
sure.
say, don't think of it in terms, well, is there a place for me at a regular school?
Sure.
Uh, uh, AIM is interested in unreached people groups. Most of the time, those are defined, by nations, or not even by nations anymore, but by particular people or culture, um, and language. But we have identified actually in several of our locations that the deaf community, even among a reached people, can be considered an unreached group because they don't have an opportunity for,
True.
um,
Yes.
and so we're looking for, believe me, we are looking for people with sign language that would be able to go to some deaf communities as direct ministry, and certainly a way to get them involved would be in any kind of an educational opportunity. But yes, there's lots of opportunities there too.
Wow. Okay. Because I remember at least two applications where people have American Sign Language and want to use that in mission. So that's exciting to hear. Um,
Mhm.
Another thing that came to mind is when you talk about creative access. Can you explain a little more what that is for those who aren't as familiar?
Sure. Um, think of it in terms of, I always think of it in terms of Africa.
Sure.
So we have traditional places in Africa that are still open to people coming in under a missionary visa. And the
Okay.
governments are saying, yes, we can still, we would love to have missionaries come, and there's no problem. But there are a number of countries, particularly in the north, and you start talking about the Muslim world,
Sure.
not open to those kinds of visitors or those kinds of visas. And so, in order for us to be able to reach unreached people groups in those locations, we have to get creative. And
Yes.
so, when we talk about getting creative, we're looking at
Mm,
creative access. How do we creatively access a nation that is legitimate? So there's legitimate identity. There's legitimacy to us being there. We're adding value to the community,
sure.
uh, but we're also we're also there with a spiritual purpose of bringing the gospel to those that have never had a chance to hear. And so that's what creative access is about.
I love that. I love that. Another thing I was wondering about is the different what's required ahead of time to, let's say, teach in these different venues. So if it's a
Mhm.
formal education, is it the same qualifications that we would have here in the States where you need your degree, your teaching degree? Is it the same kind of thing in each of these, or are there some that have differing qualifications?
Yeah, I would think in almost all of your formal schools, your day schools, your boarding schools, RVA, most of them are
Hmm.
accredited, the same accrediting agencies that are used here in the States.
Okay.
So professional certificate, professional degrees are required, and also a lot of the mission schools, because of living cross culturally, they would actually prefer to have some experienced teachers. So 2 years or more was kind of the general
Ah,
rule of thumb at RBA.
okay.
And the only reason for that would be there's a lot to learn your first year, and you throw a first year of teaching in the midst
Yes.
trying to learn how to live internationally, it
Yes.
can be very overwhelming. So it's really was to protect people and to try to help them as much as it was to bring a benefit to the school. But there are, like there are in education today, there are creative ways to get professional certifications and credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, there's certainly, if you have specific skills, um, I'm thinking as an administrator again now, somebody that may not be a formal chemistry teacher, but has a chemistry background. Hey, we can help, get someone to learn the teaching skills, but it's hard to find, some of those upper end teachers with those skills. So even there's ways that we could, that people can get their credentials if they don't actually bring them to the table right away.
Okay. Okay. Now, how about homeschooling? Is that the same idea? You want someone with a teaching degree of some kind?
Yeah, I mean, think about it as a parent,
Sure.
who do you want in your
Yeah.
kids? So you'd want a professional, you'd want somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yes.
Um, and so that's ideal.
Yes.
Um, it sometimes can be difficult for people to say, I've gone through all this training, and now I'm going to go and teach one family, or
Right.
two kids or three kids. But
Right.
that it's hard from you look at it from a worldly perspective, or even just a human perspective, not even necessarily worldly.
Sure.
But you think about it in terms of, what kind of impact am I going to have for the kingdom? And oftentimes God says, you know what, some people have the opportunity to have impact on lots of people, but some people just have impact on a few, but it's still important.
Right. And then those few impact and more, and it's that exponential effect. That's right.
Exactly. Hmm.
So yeah, feel free to type in any questions you might have. We'll be happy to address them and try and answer them the best we can. And as I'm listening for those, I have another question about when you said with homeschooling, you generally do a training team. I wasn't sure what you meant by a training team.
Sure. So when we get people new to missions,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things we want to do is we want to really give them some training or some onboarding about, how do you do life as a missionary? I mean, everybody thinks, oh, I'll just become a missionary, but it's actually a learned skill in a lot of ways, much like becoming a teacher or becoming a doctor or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this doesn't happen just overnight, and it's a whole lot different than, um, just living in the States. Learning language and culture, becoming a belonger. Those things that we've talked about are all skills and important things that don't just happen on their own. They need to be intentional. And
Okay.
so for a lot of our people, we will place them on training teams with the focus of helping them for their first year or two, learn what it's like to be a cross-cultural worker and how to live and how do you, um, how do you learn language
Mm.
when you're not attending a language school.
Yeah.
How do you engage the community and learn culture? How do you live everyday life? How do you abide deeply in Jesus? How do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
spiritual warfare? How do you grow in your craft of discipleship and church planting and those opportunities, and then throw creative access in there? How do you do that? Um, Honorably, but yet wisely, so that you're able to stay and not, put yourself or others in jeopardy. So all of that are learned things, and so we try to be intentional by placing people under training for their first couple of years.
Okay. And so this would be a team of people all living in a the same location or same city or something like that.
Yeah, usually there's
Usually.
a team
Mm.
of people that are close by that can get together and meet regularly.
Oh, okay. Okay. And when it comes to, you were talking about the theological education, is that, are there seminaries that are already in place for the most part? And you also mentioned like an informal meeting with pastors. So this would be, you'd be looking for someone who has a degree in theology themselves, and then you're passing that on to other people in a variety of ways. Is that how that works?
Yeah, there are within AIM, but lots of other seminary or theological educational schools
Hmm.
beyond AIM. So there are opportunities all throughout the world, because everybody sees, knows the value of strengthening the church and the need for that. So, yeah, in most cases, in a formal setting, if you're going to teach at a seminary or a theological institution, there would be needed credentials that would be needed in order for you to teach there.
Okay.
Credentials that are also needed for you to get the visa in order to be there.
True.
So
Okay.
it's actually a two-way street.
Right.
Um, when we talked about meeting with pastors, I'm talking about, this is more of a grassroots type of ministry. So sometimes it can be a part of, in addition to a seminary position, but sometimes it can be more of an informal thing. But you build relationships with area pastors, and from time to time you gather them together, and you provide 3-day workshops or 5-day workshops or whatever is available, and basically you just sit and spend time on a topic, or spend time studying the word together, and just giving them an opportunity for teaching that often is not available to them, and that will then be trickled down into their church, in their ministry, their churches, as they disciple their church leaders. They
Hmm.
do the
Hmm.
same thing. It's a repeated process there.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know I had two applicants that, at least two that come to mind, where they already have training as they have their degree in theology. And in some cases, it's someone who's from a different country. One I'm thinking of is from Indonesia, and they
Mhm.
have their degree in theology. How does that work? If you're coming from a place other than the States, does that impact what mission agencies you can go with, even if you do have like a theological degree, or how does that work?
Coming from a different country may have an impact on what sending agency you may be able to go through. But as far as the actual ministry, at a theological institution,
Hmm.
um, I don't think it's really. It doesn't matter whether it's a U.S. or Europe or wherever it is. Um, someone that knows the word and has the training and background and can demonstrate that, um, can work in any of these
And any
institutions.
of
It
this.
really is just a matter of the institution itself saying yes. You're
Okay.
be a part of it. That's not so much the sending agency as it is the institution.
It's the institution that they would be teaching in if they were sent over. Okay. Okay.
Correct.
That
Mhm.
makes sense. That makes sense. Another question that I've had from some of those who are teachers who have filled out these applications is in terms of finances. Let's say you work at one of these Christian day schools. Would they need to raise support for their full living expenses, or would some of their living expenses be part of a salary they receive? Or how does that, are there differing ways that works?
Yeah, there's lots of different models. There are probably all kinds of different models out there. The model at RVA was, you're a full-fledged support raising missionary, and
Right.
so there are, but a home was provided on campus, and so that was part of the deal. I know at Roslyn Academy, um, they provided housing, free housing while you were there, and a small stipend.
Okay.
And so there's the gamut of things. It really is from school to school. You get into some of these international schools, and a full salary, would probably be provided, and then you're on your own to find housing, but they would probably help you, they have contacts and locations.
Okay.
Most of the time in these places especially schools that have been in business for a while,
Mm-hmm.
there's typically a network of all of those logistical needs. So you're often replacing someone. I know at RVA, it seemed like, somebody would move out, and then a week later a new person would move in, and that just happens year after year after year. So
Yeah.
um, that's part of the deal living internationally, is that it's never your own, and oftentimes it doesn't
Yep.
it doesn't become your house until you move out of it, because then people refer to, oh, that was so and so's house, but no
Yep.
longer. So
You
yeah.
finally get the house named after you and you've left.
Right.
Yes. Well, speaking of RVA, this is just completely personal interest. What years were you there? Because I must have been gone before you got there. Or maybe I just didn't pay attention enough as to who was leading what.
Yeah. We arrived in 2007 and
Okay.
we stayed until 2016.
Yep. Yep. I was gone before you got there. I'm not sure, you might have overlapped with other people from my family or, that kind of thing. But yes, I wondered. I loved my years at RVA. My brother is teaching there now. He and his wife and kids, though, of course, it's online like the rest of the world with COVID. So
Yeah.
it's been a crazy year, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Teachers everywhere are more tired than they usually are, I think.
It is a crazy time to be an educator, and I'm sure all of you that are out there, if you're currently in a role,
Yep.
um, my hat's off to you for what you're doing, because this is a very difficult time. Being an administrator, I just like, oh, I can't imagine trying to figure all this out and trying to plan for it. But there's always a need for people that are willing to be creative and think creatively, and be able to look at a situation not for what it doesn't bring, but for what it does bring.
Hmm.
And if you're going to get into missions, if you're thinking about this as a career, my goodness, get used to having to be flexible and to. But if that's your bent, then man, you could be a tremendous blessing in so many different ways. So take that to heart as well.
I think that's an excellent way to wrap this up, unless there's any more questions or any more comments you want to say, Tim, but I just agree completely. You can be a blessing as a teacher, and I know you could share the love of Jesus in many different cultural contexts, many different types of teaching. But a gift of teaching is one that is just so valued and so needed. So we'd welcome you to share to be in contact with us about those kind of things. We've got a couple emails on the screen that you can answer. You can send emails to if you're looking for some answers directly from Tim. You can email AIM. The email's there, mked.us@aimint.org. Feel free to do that. Or just general questions for the Mission App, go@themissionapp.com. But before we close, I just want to ask you, Tim, are there any specific needs that AIM currently has for teachers? I figure we
Hmm.
should highlight those.
How much time do I have?
You can take as long as you want.
Okay, well, I mean, all of the things that we've talked about tonight, there are opportunities for people. If you're going to be looking at, if your heart is homeschool and being a part of a family or being a part of a team, there are opportunities. If you are interested in more formal high school, junior high, elementary education, RVA, and we actually have several other schools that are a part of AIM, there are opportunities. So just to name a
Wow.
few, right now, this is RVA's current list for 2021. Elementary principal, elementary teacher, junior high and high school math teacher, junior high science teacher, biology teacher, chemistry teacher, industrial arts teacher, art teacher, Spanish, French, Swahili, PE, dorm parenting, graphic design, computer technology, and then even a physical therapist. I know that's not so much the education, but those are opportunities that are at RVA. COVID has really
Yeah.
thrown lots of things into flux, so people have found themselves, um, stressed, and it's kind of changed the rhythm, I guess, of people coming and going, and that's why you see so many needs at RVA. It's just that rhythm was interrupted big time because of COVID, and so people are coming home for various reasons, and so that is not a typical list, but it's one
Right.
that's now. So I just don't want to communicate that there's major problems at RVA. It's the issue of what we're dealing with. And then we talked about theological education. There's opportunities in many different countries and locations. We had a theological education vision trip that was planned for last June to give
Mhm.
people an opportunity to see several different schools and opportunities. We had to cancel that because of COVID, but we're looking into the possibility of putting that together again for this coming year. So be on the lookout for that on AIM's website if you're interested in that.
Very
And then I can speak knowledgeably all of these other, the Roslyn, West Nairobi, which are Kenyan schools, ones that I'm familiar with. I am sure Black Forest, Faith Academy, any of the other big schools are all in the same boat. We've all been affected the same way. They always will have needs. And so if you're interested in any of those locations, do your homework, go on websites, check it out, and ask questions, because yes, there is always an opportunity for an educator to find a key place in the kingdom.
There you have it. I like that. So we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email either of us. We'll be definitely getting back to you. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Tim, for leading us through and just explaining the different opportunities. I learned a lot, even though I grew up on the mission field and
Mm,
experienced some of these things. A lot has changed, and there's different opportunities than there even used to be. So I appreciate your time, and I'm confident that for all of you who joined us, God will lead you to the place He has for you as you keep seeking after Him. That's the main thing. Keep abiding in Him, and we know He has good plans for each of us. So
mm.
until next time, keep following Jesus, and thanks again, Tim. Bye
All
bye.
right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.